The first recording session is going to cover chapter 1, and it will cover slide 1 to slide 89. So chapter 1 is a chapter that covers a lot of ground. It jumps from one theme to another, giving us the basics of anatomy and physiology. The first slides give you the definition of anatomy, the study of internal and external structures, and the relationship between these structures and the location of these body structures. The physiology is the study of the function of the body works. And anatomy has two specialties or divisions. Gross anatomy is the division of anatomy that studies the structures or parts of the body that can be seen without the help of any type of magnifying device. So the structures that can be seen with the plain eye. So for example, entire organs, parts of an organ, membranes, you can see the inner membrane of the heart in here, muscles. When you cut an organ, you will also see muscles within the organ, the tissues lining the organ, etc. So we're not seeing tissues at the microscopic level, but we are seeing the tissue at the macroscopic level. The other specialty in anatomy is microscopic anatomy, which has two specialties: cytology, which is the study of cells, and histology, which is the study of tissues. Cyto, C-Y-T, is a root word that means cell. Histo is a root word that means tissue. So anytime you see the root C-Y-T in a medical term, that word has something to do with cells. So for example, osteocyte refers to cells of bone. So cytology is going to look at the shape of cells, function of cells, and characteristics of cells. So for example, if you look at muscle cells, we have three different types of muscle cells. We have the types of muscle cells found in cardiac muscle, which are branched and have one nuclei and have striations. On the other hand, the types of muscle cells found in skeletal muscle are going to be cylindrical, have many nuclei and striations. Smooth muscle cells, on the other hand, are spindle-shaped. They are smaller, they have one nuclei and no striations. So those descriptions of cells fall under cytology. Cells combine to make tissue. So in this case, these are the different depictions of muscle tissue. We have cardiac muscle, smooth muscle, and skeletal muscle. And you can see the cells that are found in each type of muscle tissue. Physiology studies the workings of the body, organs and organ systems. And the theme of physiology is homeostasis, or the ability of the body to maintain a constant internal environment where the organs of the body can function effectively and keep the organism alive. So you should know the definition of homeostasis. You should be able to explain the meaning of homeostasis. In the face of constant change, and we are constantly doing things that take the body out of homeostasis, we may, for example, dehydrate, and then our body fluids become low, and the body will have to take steps to bring the body back to homeostasis. So in the face of constant change, the body tries to maintain a stable environment. Then we jump to another theme that's important, and those are the levels of organization of the human body. The human body is highly organized. All living organisms are highly organized. So when you break down the body to its smaller components, we find that it's made of atoms. In the case of living things, atoms combine to make molecules, and these molecules are actually large molecules that we call macromolecules. So living things are made of macromolecules, proteins, lipids, carbohydrates, and nucleic acids. And you should know the macromolecules that make up living things. Macromolecules combine to make organelles, which are structures that make up cells. So we go from atoms to molecules to organelles to cells. So cells are the smallest living things in the body, the smallest living entities, and they are made by macromolecules that create these organelles in the cell and are in charge of the functioning of the cell. So cells combine to make tissues. There are four large categories of tissues that are found in the body: epithelial tissue, connective tissue, muscle tissue, and nervous tissue. Chapter 4 is going to deal with tissues, and we'll come back and look at the subcategories of each of these types of tissues. Tissues are going to combine to make organs. So organs are made of all four different types of tissues. For example, the skin, which is what is depicted in this picture, is made of epithelial tissue up here on the top. Below the epithelial tissue, there is a layer of connective tissue. Below the layer of connective tissue, there is adipose tissue, which is actually connective tissue. This is a form of connective tissue. There's also nervous tissue in skin in the form of receptors like temperature receptors or pain receptors or touch receptors. Muscle tissue is also found in the skin. It is found attached to hairs. Each little hair follicle has a tiny little muscle that attaches to that hair. So all four types of tissue could be found in virtually any organ, for example, in the skin. The organs combine to create organ systems. The human body has been organized into 11 organ systems. And we're going to have a brief introduction of each of the 11 organ systems. You should know the organs within each system that are mentioned in the PowerPoints and the function of the organ system mentioned in the PowerPoints. In the module site, eCampus, there is also a chart that summarizes all of the organ systems, the organs within each organ system, and the functions. So again, you have in the test, you will find that the questions pertain to the organs and the functions that are found in the PowerPoints and in the mentioned chart. So we start with the skin, which is one of the organs we covered this semester. You should know the organs found in the skin. And you should also know the listed functions of the skin. Especially note this function right here, which involves temperature regulation, which we're going to see later in chapter 1. So the skin is involved in regulating body temperature. The next organ system that we look at is the skeletal system. These are the organs. There is one organ missing from this list, which needs to be added, and that is ligaments. Ligaments are these structures that bind bone to bone, and ligaments are part of the skeletal system. Functions of the skeletal system include support, movement, and production of blood cells, and this is not something that we typically relate to bones. Inside of bones, there is a tissue called bone marrow, and bone marrow produces blood cells. All of the blood cells, white blood cells, red blood cells, and platelets. So this is often a function of the skeletal system that the students tend to forget. The muscular system, the organs of the muscular system are skeletal muscles and cells and tendons. And tendons are these white structures that you see here in the picture, which bind muscle to bone. So skeletal muscle is attached to bone via tendons. So ligaments are part of the skeletal system. Tendons are part of the muscular system. And when we talk about the muscular system, we are referring about the system of skeletal muscle that is found bound to bone and skin. This is the list of the functions of the muscular system. Again, notice that part of the function of the muscle system is to generate heat, and it is also involved on thermoregulation in maintaining body temperature. The next organ system is the nervous system. Again, make sure you know the organs of the nervous system and the functions. Now, the function of the nervous system tends to be complex, so it has been simplified and described as the collection or the detection of sensory information, the processing of this sensory information, and if a response to the sensory information is needed, the response will be put together and sent out by the nervous system. So the nervous system collects information, processes the information, and if there is a response that is needed, the response is put together by the nervous system. So that, in a nutshell, summarizes the functions of the nervous system. And those are the systems that are going to be covered this semester. It starts with the endocrine system. And the endocrine system, and this PowerPoint is kind of jumbled, hard to read. But the endocrine system is a system of organs called glands, and that are going to secrete chemicals into the blood. These chemicals are called hormones. So by definition, hormones are chemicals secreted into the blood. You need to know the list of these endocrine glands and organs from the PowerPoints. These are the pituitary gland, the thyroid gland, the adrenal glands, which are found on top of the kidneys, the pancreas, the testes in males, and the ovaries in females. The pancreas, the testes, and the ovaries will also be found in other systems. The pancreas are part of the digestive system and the endocrine system, so they have double function. The testes and the ovaries are also part of the reproductive system and the endocrine system. So again, these are organs that belong to two systems because they have more complex functions. The circulatory system, again, you need to know the organs. Blood and blood vessels are considered organs, part of the circulatory system. The circulatory system is the transport system of the body and is going to transport gases like oxygen and carbon dioxide, nutrients, hormones, electrolytes, etc. Another function of the circulatory system is, again, has temperature. With regulation of temperature, it equalizes temperature in the body. So there are three systems involved in thermoregulation: the integumentary system, the muscular system, and the cardiovascular or circulatory system. Next system is the lymphatic system. Again, know the organs of the lymphatic system and the functions: to collect tissue fluid and return it to blood. The lymphatic system is also the immune system. The respiratory system, you should know the organs: the larynx, which is the voice box, trachea, which is the windpipe, and then the bronchi, which will bring air into the lungs, and the air will fill little air sacs called the alveoli. So the respiratory system is the system that brings in oxygen. It delivers that oxygen to the blood. It collects the carbon dioxide waste and excretes carbon dioxide out of the body. So it's an exchange of gases between lungs and circulatory system. Digestive system, again, know the organs of the digestive system. Notice the pancreas, which was also part of the endocrine system. The functions will be to process, digest food, absorb nutrients, and eliminate waste. The urinary system, know the organs, the kidneys, obviously, right here, which are going to filter blood, which is one of the functions of the urinary system, is to filter blood of waste products, of excess ions, in excess water, if needed. So the kidneys are going to filter blood, and they're going to make urine. Urine is transported via these long tubes here, called the ureters, to the urinary bladder for storage. And from the urinary bladder, urine will be voided through the urethra. Functions of the kidneys, again, it filter blood. And this one is another function which is very important. It says control water balance by the body. So this is an important function of the kidneys, which is involved in controlling the volume of blood in the body, controlling fluids in the body, so that if we are dehydrated, for example, the kidneys will retain water and we will pee less. If we're overhydrated, the kidneys will release more water. So that's an important system of the urinary system, an important function of the urinary system. And then finally, we have the reproductive system, male and female. Again, know the functions and the organs, which can barely read them, but it's the vas deferens, the testes, and the penis. And the function of the system will be to produce hormones, which is the function of the testes. And again, testes was also part of the endocrine system, and to produce the sperm. The case of females, ovaries, can barely read these, uterus, uterine tubes will be the organs. Ovaries are going to be part of the endocrine system also. Function, the production of sex hormones, the sex cells, development of the embryo, and nourishing of the newborn. All right. So again, this chapter jumps from one theme to another. So now we're going to jump to the next theme, which is, again, homeostasis and the mechanisms by which the body keeps homeostasis. So in order to keep homeostasis, the body needs to detect changes that are happening in the body and then put out a response. The response is going to be called the feedback. So homeostasis is the maintenance of a constant, stable internal environment. To maintain an internal environment doesn't mean that the body, that there is a set point for the variables of the body, but rather there is a range of normal values that are within homeostasis. So in order to keep homeostasis, the body has to keep track of the state of variables. Variables are values in the body that change. Values like blood pressure, temperature, blood pH, heart rate. So during our daily livings, we are going through changes. We, again, might dehydrate, and that will affect the blood pressure, for example. We may eat, and when we eat, all of a sudden we get a surge of glucose in the body. So now blood glucose may reach levels that are outside of homeostatic range, and the body has to intervene via feedback mechanisms to bring the variable back to homeostasis. So you should know what variables are. You should be able to come up with examples of variables that the body needs to keep at equilibrium in order to maintain homeostasis. And this PowerPoint is showing you what it's meant by a range of normal values versus a set point. So for example, normal body temperature is not one set point, but it's a range, maximum and minimum range that is within normal. Anytime the temperature goes outside of that range, the body is out of homeostasis. Homeostatic regulation involves the monitoring of variables. This is done via specialized nervous system cells called receptors. These cells can be found in different organs in the body. For example, the heart will have receptors for blood pressure. Some blood vessels have receptors for blood pressure. Some blood vessels also have receptors that are sensitive to levels of oxygen in the body or changes of pH in the body. The kidneys also have receptors. The brain has receptors that monitor variables. So throughout the body, there are these receptors that are monitoring the variables within the body that are part of the internal environment of the body. Any type of abnormal value will be communicated to the nervous system, which is typically the control center, and the nervous system will put together a response that will be enacted by the effector organs. So effector organs are the organs that are going to act out the response that will bring the body back to homeostasis. The effector organs are skeletal muscles, organ muscles, meaning smooth muscle in organs, and cardiac muscle in the heart. So this could be the smooth muscle in blood vessels, for example, and glands. So there's a communication between receptors and effectors via the nervous system and the endocrine system. So the receptors are going to detect a change in variables, which is called a stimulus. Okay. The receptors are going to communicate that change to the central nervous system, and the central nervous system will put out a response that will be acted out by effectors. So, for example, the stimulus could be an increase in body temperature. The effectors are going to act to either decrease body temperature and bring it back to homeostasis, and that response is called the feedback. So most feedbacks are going to reverse the stimulus and bring the body back to homeostasis. Some feedback mechanisms, however, are going to instead increase the stimulus and increase the level of change. So you should be able to explain the components of a control mechanism that maintains homeostasis. The receptors or sensors that monitor the variables in the environment. Changes in the environment, in the variables, are called stimuli. These receptors are going to communicate with the control center, which is typically the brain or the spinal cord, and the control center is going to put together a response that will be carried out by effector organs. So effector organs receive the order from the nervous system, the output, to act out a response that will affect the stimulus. The response is either going to reduce the stimulus or enhance the stimulus. This response is called the feedback. So here's the typical example of these types of mechanisms. Temperature, which is something we're all familiar with. Homeostasis will be normal body temperature. But let's say that we decide to go running on a hot Texas summer day, and our body temperature begins to increase. The increase in body temperature is detected by receptors who communicate the information to the central nervous system. The receptors are going to be found in the skin in this instance, and also the brain. The hypothalamus of the brain also has temperature receptors. The central nervous system, in this case the brain, is going to receive the information, more specifically the hypothalamus, and it will put together a response that will be carried out by effectors. The response in this case will be enacted by sweat glands, which will begin to sweat, and that will cool off the body. Also, blood vessels in the skin, the smooth muscle in the blood vessels will relax, which will make the blood vessels dilate. So more blood will flow through these blood vessels because they have enlarged, and the temperature will diffuse through the skin, cooling the body body down. So there are two types of effectors that are responding: the blood vessels, the smooth muscles in the blood vessels of the skin, which relax, and sweat glands, which are going to secrete sweat. The response will bring the body back to homeostasis. So this response is the feedback. So again, we have two types of response, two types of feedback that are possible. The first one is called negative feedback, and by far this is the most common regulatory mechanism. This is the most common response. Negative feedback is the one that's going to bring the body back to homeostasis by opposing the stimulus. So if the temperature is increasing, negative feedback is going to decrease the temperature back to homeostatic levels. So this is negative feedback. If blood pressure increases, negative feedback will decrease blood pressure back to homeostatic levels. If blood pressure is decreasing, negative feedback will increase the blood pressure back up to normal levels. So negative feedback is by far, most of the time, the body is using negative feedback to maintain homeostasis. There's a long list of mechanisms that utilize negative feedback to keep variables within a normal range. Control of body temperature, control of blood pressure, control of blood volume via hormones like ADH hormones, control of calcium blood levels via two hormones, PTH and calcitonin. So receptors are monitoring these variables. And for example, if blood calcium increases to levels that are higher than the homeostatic ranges, and the homeostatic ranges could be something like 8.5 to 10.5 milligrams of calcium per deciliter of blood. So these are the normal values. If normal levels of blood calcium become something like 5.0 milligrams per deciliter, that's too low. Now a hormone will kick in, PTH, that will bring the calcium levels back up to normal values. Okay. So that will be a negative feedback response. By the same token, if blood calcium levels go too high, the other hormone, calcitonin, will bring the blood calcium levels back down to homeostatic levels, ranges. This is a negative feedback loop. In this case, again, they're using temperature as the example. So body temperature increases. The receptors are going to detect the change. The information is sent to the central nervous system, which puts together a response carried out by effectors. In this case, the effectors are the sweat glands, and none mentioned in this example, but you do know also the effectors in this case will be skin blood vessels, which will dilate to bring more blood to the surface of the body to lose heat. So these will be the response, the negative feedback, that will bring the body temperature back to homeostatic levels. And one more time, the example of temperature. This up here is what happens when the body's temperature increases. And in this case, the response is going to be sweat glands will be activated and evaporation will take place. Also, the blood vessels in the skin will dilate to dissipate the heat from blood vessels. So the response will bring temperature back to homeostasis. Okay. In the case of low temperature, now the effectors that will enact the negative feedback are going to be skeletal muscles. The body will begin to shiver in an attempt to generate more heat that will bring the body back to homeostatic levels. Another effector in this particular case will also be skin blood vessels, which in this case are going to constrict to prevent blood from going to the skin. So the blood will be retained in the core of the body, and will not be dissipated in the skin. So skin blood vessels will constrict. So typically we're cold, we turn pale. When we're hot, we turn red. This is the example of blood pressure. I'll let you read it, but the principle is the same. If blood pressure increases, heart rate will decrease in an attempt to decrease blood pressure. So in this case, the effector organ will be the cardiac muscle of the heart. And this is another example. In this case, is blood volume, and the effector organ is going to be the pituitary gland secreting ADH hormone, which will help to increase blood levels, blood volume levels, by retaining water in the kidneys. So there are a multitude of examples of negative feedback. Positive feedback, on the other hand, is much more rare. Positive feedback is going to increase the level of change. So instead of opposing the change, it's going to stimulate the change and increase the change. Positive feedback mechanisms are seldom needed by the body. When the body uses positive feedback mechanisms, these are typically short-lived instances that are geared to accomplish a specific goal. Once that specific goal is accomplished, the positive feedback mechanism will be removed, because a positive feedback mechanism that is long-lasting can be harmful to the body. You should know the examples of negative feedback mechanism, which are very, very few: blood clotting, labor and delivery, and inflammation. When the body clots blood, it has a specific goal in mind, which is to stop bleeding. The minute the blood is formed and it is big enough to stop the bleeding, then the blood clotting process is stopped. Otherwise, the blood clot will increase in size, continue to increase, and it will completely block circulation, or even worse, it could dislodge and begin traveling and block blood vessels in important organs like the brain, for example. In the case of inflammation, the goal of inflammation is the repair of damaged tissue. In this instance, the body will begin to secrete chemicals. So cells in the body secrete chemicals, which are, many of them are toxic chemicals. These chemicals are going to destroy tissue, clean up tissue that has been damaged, to allow for the regeneration of the tissue to healthy tissue. These chemicals also attract cells to the area, and these cells secrete more chemicals. And these chemicals attract more cells, which secrete more chemicals. And you see this as a positive feedback loop that should be short-lived. It should diminish as soon as the tissue is repaired. If those chemicals allowed to continue, they could begin damaging healthy tissue. Labor and delivery is another example of positive feedback. In this case, the goal is the birth of the baby. And what's happening when the labor approaches is that the baby is now in position to be born and is pushing against the birth canal or cervix. That pushing creates pressure against the birth canal. So now there is pressure in the area. That pressure is communicated to the brain, which will begin to secrete a hormone called oxytocin. Oxytocin causes the contraction of the uterus. So now the uterus begins to contract and pushes the baby into the birth canal, which creates more pressure. Increase in pressure results in an increase in secretion of oxytocin. Increased oxytocin means increased uterine contraction, will create even more pressure as the baby further goes into the birth canal. Now perhaps the head and the shoulders are in the birth canal, creating more pressure. More pressure means more oxytocin, which means more uterine contractions, and now the baby is further moving into the birth canal, which creates more pressure, and you get the picture. This is positive feedback mechanism. It is a positive feedback loop that will end when the baby is born. Blood clotting is the third example of positive feedback. I will let you read the process. So you do need to know the three examples of positive feedback. And again, the problem with positive feedback is that it takes the body further and further away from homeostasis, and that's why it can be damaging. So positive feedback should be short-lived. As soon as the goal is accomplished, the positive feedback should be reversed into a negative feedback mechanism that will bring the body back to homeostasis. Okay, so now we're going to jump again, and we are going to look at anatomical terms and how they're used. And the first thing that we learn when we start going over anatomical terms is what we call the anatomical position. And this is a standardized position of the body that allows us to agree as to what parts of the body are anterior, which ones are posterior, which ones are lateral, which ones are medial. In the anatomical position, notice that the palms of the hand are facing forward, so they're going to be anterior, while the tip of the elbow will be posterior. The feet are also facing forward, so they're going to be anterior, whereas the calcaneus of the heel will be posterior. So you should be able to describe or recognize descriptions of subjects in the anatomical position. And when an anatomical term is used, or anatomical terms are used when we describe the structure in the body, we always assume that we're describing it in regards to the anatomical position. We describe the palms of the hand in the anatomical position as being up. The term supine describes palms up. The opposite will be prone, which is when the palms are down. Supine and prone are also used to describe the position of the entire body. Supine face up, prone face down. So we've reached PowerPoint 89, and from this point on, the second part of the recording will take over. So I'm going to go ahead and stop here.